The knock came at 12:17 in the morning. 3 beats. Solid, evenly spaced, not the frantic kind that meant trouble on the road, not the loose kind that meant a neighbor who'd had too much. These were deliberate, the knock of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had made peace with doing it at this hour. Reeve Callum heard it from the back bedroom, pulled out of the shallow sleep he'd been managing since about 10. He sat up in the dark and listened. Silence. Then nothing else, no second knock, no footsteps retreating. Whoever was out there was still standing at his door, waiting. He pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt and moved through the kitchen without turning on the overhead. The porch light was already on. He kept it burning most nights. Habit from when Maisie was small enough to be afraid of full dark. He looked through the side window before touching the deadbolt. A woman, dark blazer, wet at the shoulders, hair stuck flat against one cheek from the mist coming off the mountain. She wasn't looking at the door, she was looking out toward the tree line, the way someone does when they're giving themselves one last moment before a thing becomes real. Then she turned, and in the yellow porch light, her eyes were steady and awake. Not the eyes of someone who'd driven 4 hours and arrived undone. The eyes of someone who had thought every mile of this through. Reeve opened the door. She held out a business card without speaking. He took it, looked down. Dunn. Structural Partners. Cyrse Dunn. Chief Executive Officer. 7 years. He had spent 7 years making that name into something he didn't have to think about, filing it away behind the work, behind Maisie's school pickups and grocery runs, and the slow rhythm of Beachland that asked nothing of the person he used to be. And now, it was printed in clean sans serif type on a card in his hand, standing on his porch at 12:17 in the morning, looking at him without blinking. He looked up. She didn't step back. His hand found the doorframe and held it, not out of anger. Not yet. Out of the need to feel something solid, while his mind caught up with what his body already understood. He didn't know what she wanted, but he knew, from the way she was looking at him, from the hour she had chosen, that whatever she'd brought to his door wasn't something he could turn away at the threshold. She stood in the mist and waited for him to speak. He didn't. So she did. She told him she had taken over as CEO of Dunn Structural Partners 3 months ago, after her father's illness made it impossible for him to continue. In January, she had begun a full audit of project files from the previous decade, not because she suspected anything specific at first, but because she needed to understand what she had inherited. The Graldun Tower project from 2017 appeared in those files with a discrepancy she couldn't account for. A technical addendum had been attached to the structural approval, bearing his signature that wasn't present in any version of the original signed document. Someone had added it afterward. She needed him to confirm that. Reeve listened to all of it without moving from the doorframe. When she finished, the night was quiet enough that he could hear the creak down the slope. "Do you know what happened on that job?" he said. She held his gaze. "I know someone died. I know your wife was one of them." She didn't soften it or reach for the word sorry. "I'm not here to apologize on behalf of the company. I'm here because I think you and I need to find something out together." That was the thing that moved him, not the apology she didn't offer. He'd had enough of those in the months after. The thing that moved him was that she said together. He stepped back from the door. In the kitchen, he put the kettle on and kept his back to her. She sat down at the table, opened a laptop, opened a file. He heard the quiet tap of keys and felt 7 years walk through his front door behind her, slow and certain, filling the room. She called him over. He looked at the document on the screen, the technical addendum, the stamp of the materials division, the signature line with his name on it, in a typeface he recognized as close but not his. The spacing was wrong. The period after the middle initial sat 2 pixels too far to the right. "You never saw this before it was attached," she said. It wasn't a question she had already decided, from the way his face changed. "No." She made a note. She didn't press for more. Reeve looked at her in the low light of his kitchen, at the careful, unsentimental way she was working, and understood that she hadn't driven 4 hours in October rain to throw something at him. She had come because she was trying to understand something, and he was the piece she didn't have yet. Warren Grawl had access to the file after I signed, he said. He was the only one outside the engineering team who did. She wrote the name down without reacting. Then she looked up. Warren is still senior legal counsel for the company. Reeve said nothing. That's why I didn't call, she said. She closed the laptop. Outside, the mist had thickened against the windows. She set a second folder on the table. Different color, no label. She slid it across to him and let him open it himself. It was not a construction file. The paper was lighter stock, the font different internal formatting, not the official template done structural used for project documents. She had found it in Warren Grawl's physical filing cabinet during the office audit, tucked behind the last divider in an unlabeled sleeve. Reeve read the header and stopped breathing. Iris Callum. Safety Engineer. Dunn Structural Partners. The date at the top read March 14, 2017. 11 days before the third-floor slab came down. He read slowly. Iris had flagged the floor materials in the tower's third-level section as failing to meet the dynamic load standard. The safety factor was 23% below what the original design specified. She had recommended a full halt to inspection activity on that floor until the materials could be independently certified. She had submitted the report to Warren Grawl. There was a timestamp on the submission. There was nothing after it. Reeve's eyes moved over her handwriting in the margins, the way she underlined figures twice when she wanted them remembered, the small question mark she'd written beside a line that read, "Why wasn't the December shipment logged separately?" He knew that handwriting. He knew it the way he knew the sound of her voice, the way he knew the specific quiet she made when she was working through something that didn't add up yet. He read to the last page. Then he folded the folder closed and placed it on the table with both hands, the way you set something down when you don't trust yourself to drop it. She submitted this, he said. Not a question, not to Sayers, to the room. Yes, she did everything right. Yes, and she still went in for that inspection. He was working it out in real time, because the inspection wasn't stopped, because Grawl didn't stop it. Sayers opened the next page in the folder, 2 copies of an inspection calendar. The original, dated early March, had the floor check scheduled for the 28th. The revised version, approved 4 days after Iris submitted her report, moved it to the 25th. The approval signature on the revision, W. Grawl. Reeve stood up from the table. He walked to the back door and went out onto the small porch that faced the ridge, leaving the door open behind him. The mountain dark settled around him. Sayers stayed at the table and did not follow. The folder was still there when he came back inside 15 minutes later. He sat down across from her and looked at her directly, for the first time since she'd walked through the door. What do you need from me? I need you to stand up and say what you know. The room was quiet. I can't do that. He said it without anger, without apology. He said it the way a person states a fact they have checked against every other fact they know and found to be true. Sayers set her pen down. She didn't argue immediately. She looked at him, the real kind of looking, the kind that takes inventory. Walk me through it, she said. Maisie is 7 years old. His voice was level. You understand what happens to her if I go back into this? I drag all of it back into this house. Warren Grawl is not a man who sits still when someone comes at him. You've seen that much already. Or you wouldn't have driven here in the dark instead of calling. He will come at me, and when he does, Maisie is in the room. She's in the school. She's in the middle of every conversation about her father that she's going to have for the next 10 years. Sayers was quiet for a moment. You're right. I don't know what that's like. Then don't ask me to do it. I'm asking because Warren Grawl is still sitting in that building. Her voice didn't rise, it went quieter, which was worse. And if he stays there, the next time he decides a shipment of substandard material isn't worth the paperwork of flagging, someone else will die. And that time no one will drive 4 hours to tell the person who could have stopped it. The silence that followed was the long kind. Reeve looked at the folder between them. Then he looked at her. You drove here knowing I'd say no. I didn't know that. I hoped you'd say yes. But you came anyway. I came anyway. He didn't say anything more. After a moment he told her it was raining, and she didn't know these roads, and there was a couch. She could leave in the morning. It wasn't an invitation, it was a practical statement about geography and weather, the kind of thing he might have said to any person stranded on a mountain road in October, and she received it as such and nodded once. He turned off the kitchen light. Through the wall she could hear him move down the hall. The slow, careful sound of a man trying not to wake someone, though there was no one to wake. The soft click of his bedroom door. Cyrus lay on the couch in the dark and looked at the ceiling. The house was old enough that it had its own sounds. The contraction of wood in the cold, something moving in the eaves. She had driven 4 hours and sat across from him in this kitchen for 2 more, and she had not gotten what she came for. She turned that fact over in her mind without judgment, trying to see it from where he stood. A 7-year-old daughter. A settlement he had signed in grief. A man on the other side of it who had been operating without consequence for long enough that he had forgotten to be afraid. She understood why Reeve had said no. She also knew, with the particular clarity that comes from being alone and honest with yourself at 1 in the morning in a stranger's house, that she could not do this without him. And she was fairly certain, from the silence on the other side of the wall, that he wasn't sleeping either. At 6:47 the next morning, while the coffee was still brewing, her phone lit up with an office number she recognized. She took it outside to the porch. Warren Grawl did not say hello. "I know where you are, Saoirse." She didn't deny it. "You're tracking my location? I'm protecting the company. That's been my job for 20 years. His voice was even the voice of a man who had talked his way through difficult rooms many times and found it easy. "You're digging at something you don't fully understand. Come back to Chicago. Today. Is that a threat?" "It's the advice of someone who understands more than you do. Come home." She ended the call. She stood on the porch for a full minute before she went back inside. She drove back to Chicago that afternoon. 2 days later, a story appeared on an industry news site, no byline, no named source, describing Dunn Structural's new CEO as conducting an unauthorized internal investigation that was creating legal liability for shareholders. The framing was careful. Every sentence was technically accurate. The cumulative effect was to make her look like a destabilizing force, rather than someone trying to find the truth. The board called an emergency session. 3 of the 5 members wanted answers. Leonard Hayes, one of those 3, the one who had known Warren longest, moved to suspend the internal review pending independent legal review. Then the IT department sent her a notification. The email archive for the Grawl-Dunn Tower project, spanning 2016 through 2018, had been deleted from the primary server. The deletion order had come from an admin-level account assigned to the senior legal counsel's office. It had been executed at 7:03 in the morning, 16 minutes after Warren had hung up the phone. Sayer sat at her desk and looked at the empty folder path on her screen. The digital record gone, the board moving against her. The only evidence remaining was the physical folder she had carried to Beachland in her bag, and back again. She called Reeve. He answered on the second try. Warren deleted the emails. All of them. "The board is meeting about me." She didn't lead up to it. "I still have the physical folder, Iris's report, the inspection calendar, but I can't prove the bribery without something that shows where the money went. I need to know if you kept anything from 2017. There was silence on his end that lasted longer than a simple no would require. "Reeve, I need time." "I don't have time." She hung up. She sat looking at her phone, at the empty archive path, at the window above her desk where the Chicago sky sat gray and flat. She thought about what it would mean to keep going from here without him. 3 days later, Leonard Hayes called on behalf of the board. He read from a prepared statement. The motion to suspend Saoirse Dunn from her role as CEO of Dunn Structural Partners had passed. 4 votes to 1, her own dissenting vote counted and noted. The finding was an unauthorized internal investigation constituting a conflict of interest. The suspension was effective immediately. Her system access would be revoked within the hour. A security escort would accompany her to collect personal items. She stood in the elevator lobby and listened to a man read the end of the thing she had spent 3 months trying to build. When he finished, she said thank you and ended the call, and waited for the elevator with her keycard already in her pocket, knowing it wouldn't work. Outside on the sidewalk, she called her father. Harold Dunn was in the hospital for a treatment round that week, the kind that left him thin and careful in his movements, but not unclear in his thinking. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, a silence stretched between them, the kind that has weight. "Come to the hospital," he said. "There's something I need to say to your face." When she arrived, he was sitting up in the bed, IV in his arm, the window behind him letting in pale late afternoon light. He waited for her to sit down. "I knew there was a problem with the 2017 file," he said, each word deliberate. "Warren told me the structural engineer had made an error and had signed a settlement. I accepted that. I didn't investigate further because Warren had worked beside me for 20 years, and I trusted him without testing him. That's on me." He paused. "I didn't know about your mother-in-law's report." He caught himself. He had spoken as if she were family. He let it stand. "I didn't know about the woman who filed it and was ignored. If I had known, I would like to believe I would have acted differently. I can't prove that now, but I can tell you it's true." Saoirse looked at her father in the hospital light. "The only person who can bring Warren down," Harold said, "is the man Warren buried with that settlement. There's no other path." She already knew it, but hearing it from him made it something she could carry back out the door. "I'll call him again," she said. "Don't call him." Harold reached for his phone on the bedside table. "I will." The call that woke Clint Oubre's landline at 8 in the evening came from a number with a Chicago area code, and the man on the other end introduced himself as Harold Dunn. Clint was 64 years old, had worked 2 years as a subcontract laborer for Dunn Structural before coming back to Beachland, and had exactly one reason to receive a call from the company's founder. He listened. He said he understood. He put on his coat. Reeves' phone rang at 10:45 from an unfamiliar number, Clint's son's cell, as it turned out, because Clint's own phone had died on the drive. The old man's voice came through the speaker, a little rough from years and road noise. "I'm in Chicago, sitting next to a man named Harold Dunn in a hospital room. He found me through old company records." A pause. "He doesn't have a lot of time, Reeve. Not the kind you can waste on waiting for the right moment." Reeve sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he hung up. He looked at the window, at the black outside. He thought about Maisie sleeping down the hall, the small sound of her breathing he had memorized so well that silence from that direction still woke him up faster than any alarm. He went to her doorway and stood in it for a minute. She was flat on her back with one arm thrown over her face, the way she slept when she was deeply under. A drawing was still in her other hand, the pencil fallen beside her on the pillow. He walked across the hall and called the Tuckers, the family across the road, whose daughter was Maisie's closest friend. Ellen Tucker answered on the third ring without sounding annoyed about the hour. She said, "Of course, bring her over in the morning before you go. We'll make pancakes." He thanked her. He stood in the kitchen for a moment in the silence of his own house, the particular silence of a place built around one child's sleeping schedule, shaped by years of careful quiet. He thought about what Iris had written on that piece of paper. 3 names. A sealed envelope. Instructions for a contingency she had hoped would never be needed. She had known something was wrong. She had submitted the report and heard nothing back, and she had known, in the way careful people know things they would rather not know, that the silence meant exactly what silence usually means, and she had written the names down anyway. She had gone to the inspection anyway, because that was her job, and she believed in doing it. And she had trusted that the chain she was setting in motion would keep moving after her, if it had to. He had been carrying her last act in a metal box for 7 years without opening it. He packed a bag. He set an alarm. He lay down on the bed without sleeping, and for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, the sleeplessness felt like something other than grief. He arrived at the hospital at 9 in the morning. Saoirse was standing in the hall outside his father's room. When she saw him step off the elevator, she went still for a moment, looking at him with an expression that didn't try to be anything in particular, not gratitude, not relief, just recognition. She didn't ask why he had changed his mind. Harold Dunn's room was small and quiet, morning light coming through the window above the bed. The old man was sitting up when Reeve walked in. He looked at Reeve the way people look at someone they've thought about at a distance for a long time, measuring the gap between the idea of the person and the person themselves. "Do you hate me?" Harold asked. Reeve thought about it honestly. "I don't know. I'm not here for you." Harold nodded slowly. "That's fair." After a moment, Clint came in from the corridor. He'd been getting coffee and set a battered metal case on the bedside table. Waterproof, dented at one corner, Reeve recognized it before Clint said a word. "Iris gave this to me the week before she died," Clint said. "She said, if you ever asked for it, give it to you. If you never asked, keep it forever." He looked at Reeve without judgment. "You never asked." Reeve took the case. He opened it on the small table beside the bed. Inside, a USB drive, a printed photograph, and a sealed envelope in Iris's handwriting. He opened the envelope first. Inside, 3 names and phone numbers: Dana Reyes, structural engineer; Paul Atkins, former Dunn project coordinator; Marcus Webb, independent materials inspector. Beneath the names, one line: "If something happens to me, these people know about the Kessler December shipment. Ask Marcus Webb first." The photograph was taken on a phone, slightly blurred, but clear enough. A crate of flooring material in a staging area, the shipping label visible. Kessler Materials, a lot number, a delivery date, and in the lower right of the frame, partially in shot, a receiving slip signed by the person who had accepted the delivery on behalf of Dunn Structural. The signature read, W. Grawl. The USB held more images in higher resolution, the same lot number appearing across multiple delivery receipts, the same signature. A printout of a vendor record showing a payment from an LLC called GW, consulting to a Kessler Materials sales account dated 2 months after the Ridgeway project signed off. A second payment the following year. A third, larger one, in December of 2016. Iris hadn't just written a report. She had built a case. She had done it quietly, over weeks, and she had given it to the one person she trusted to keep it safe, with instructions for the one person she trusted to use it when the time came. Sowers stood at the foot of the bed, looking at the photographs spread across the table. She said nothing for a long time. Then, Marcus Webb. I know that name. She was already pulling out her phone. He's currently running independent inspections on 2 of our active projects. Reeve looked at her. Iris put him first on the list. I know. She stepped into the hallway to make the call. Reeve stayed in the room with Harold and Clint. The old man in the bed had closed his eyes, not sleeping, just resting with one hand laid flat on top of the thin hospital blanket. Harold opened his eyes and looked at the photograph still on the table. He said, quietly, 20 years. No one answered him. There was nothing useful to say. Sayers came back into the room. Marcus Webb has his full inspection report from the Ridgeway project in 2012. He kept it because he suspected something was wrong with the materials sign-off, and he never felt right letting it go. He said. She paused. He said he'd been waiting for someone to call. She looked at Reeve. Harold reached for the phone on his bedside table. His lawyer, not the company's lawyer, his personal one, 30 years answered on the second ring. Harold spoke in a measured voice and did not stop to reconsider. He invoked his founder's rights under the company charter to call an emergency board session. He moved to reverse the suspension of his daughter. He formally authorized the transfer of all relevant documents to an independent litigation attorney, and he directed that Warren Grawl be suspended from all company activities, his system access revoked, and his files preserved, effective within 24 hours. When he set the phone down, he looked at Reeve. It's not enough. I know that, but it's what I have. Reeve nodded once. Then he picked up his coat from the chair back. I need to find a lawyer, he said. Elaine Marsh's office was on the 31st floor of a building on West Wacker. and she had been doing construction fraud litigation for 19 years. She cleared the afternoon when Cyrus called. She read through the physical folder and examined the USB drive contents for 45 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. This is federal territory. The shell company payments, the altered delivery records, the systematic substitution of substandard materials across multiple projects. This is organized commercial bribery, potentially wire fraud. The FBI can take this. Then take it, Reeves said. There's a complication. She set her pen down. Warren Grawl filed a motion this afternoon in the Northern District of Illinois. Emergency injunction. He's claiming attorney-client privilege over all documents related to the Grawl-Dunn project. His argument is that in his capacity as legal counsel, every communication and file he touched is protected. If the court accepts it, we can't hand anything to the FBI for 72 hours, pending a full hearing. The room was quiet. And Kessler Materials? Cyrus asked. Already moving to destroy their storage records from 2012 through 2017. Standard archiving procedure, they're calling it. I filed for an emergency preservation order this afternoon, but it takes time to process. Reeve looked at the folder on the desk, at the photograph with Warren's signature on the receiving slip, at the names Iris had written in an envelope she had sealed and handed to a man she trusted, knowing she might not be there to open it herself. What do you need from me specifically? He asked. At the hearing tomorrow, the privilege claim needs to be defeated by invoking the crime-fraud exception. Attorney-client protection doesn't cover communications made in furtherance of fraud. I can argue the exception on the documentary record, but it's stronger with testimony. The forged addendum on the structural approval, you're the only person who can confirm it wasn't in the document you signed. No one else has that knowledge. Cyrus was watching him. She wasn't pushing. She was simply present, on the other side of the desk, waiting for him to arrive at the place he was going to arrive at anyway. Reeve looked at the desk. He thought of Iris at her own desk somewhere, 11 days before the inspection she walked into, carefully writing 3 names on a piece of paper and sealing it in an envelope, knowing the inspection schedule had been moved, knowing she had submitted the report and heard nothing back. Knowing, in the way careful people know things they would rather not know, that something was not right. She had gone anyway, because it was her job and she believed in doing it, and because she trusted that the chain of accountability she had set in motion would continue without her if it had to. What time is the hearing? Reeve said. Elaine Marsh looked at him steadily. 9 o'clock. Northern District Courthouse, room 14. The courtroom was smaller than it looked in films. Wood paneling, fluorescent light, a seal on the wall behind the bench that had seen better decades. Warren Grawl sat at the respondents' table with 3 attorneys in matching dark suits. His posture, the posture of a man who had been in rooms like this before and found them manageable. Elaine Marsh defeated the injunction in 18 minutes. The crime-fraud exception was not a new doctrine. When an attorney facilitates fraud, when the privilege is used not to protect legitimate legal counsel, but to shield an ongoing criminal enterprise, that privilege dissolves. Elaine laid the documentary record in front of the judge in a sequence that left no gap. The shell company, the payment pattern, the substituted materials, the altered calendar, the buried report, the forged addendum. She spoke without drama and didn't need any. The judge read. The judge asked 2 questions. Warren's lead attorney objected 6 times. 5 of those objections were overruled before he finished the sentence. The injunction was denied. FBI agents received the complete document transfer at 11:40 that morning. But the hearing did not end there. Elaine had filed a motion for extended evidentiary proceedings on grounds of ongoing destruction risk. The judge granted it. The courtroom settled into a different kind of session, the kind where testimony matters. Marcus Webb took the stand first. He had the file he'd kept since 2012, his independent inspection report from the Ridgeway project, preserved in full. He walked through the materials data in the precise language of someone who had looked at these numbers many times and knew exactly what they meant. The floor load calculations, the ASTM standard the materials were supposed to meet, the gap between the standard and what was actually used, the gap that existed in Ridgeway and existed again. Wider. In Graldun Tower, Dana Reyes came next. She was a structural engineer who had worked a different floor of the same building in 2017. She knew Iris. They had overlapped for 8 months, shared a workspace, talked the way colleagues talk when the work is demanding. She had received an email from Iris the day after the report was filed. She had read it many times over the years. She knew it by heart, but she read it from her phone anyway, because it deserved to be read precisely. The email read, "I filed it. Warren has it now. If nothing happens in a week, I'll go above him. But I want someone to know this existed. If it ever becomes important, you'll know what to do." Dana Reyes paused after she read that last sentence. The courtroom was very quiet. She said, "I didn't know what to do. I kept the email. I kept it every year, in every email account I moved to, and I didn't know what to do with it until 2 days ago when someone finally called." Then it was Reeves' turn. He walked to the front of the room and sat down and stated his name and his professional background: 10 years as a licensed structural engineer, the last 7 spent in Beachland, West Virginia, working in carpentry. He said it plainly, without embarrassment or explanation. The judge noted it. He confirmed that the technical addendum attached to his approval signature on the Graldun Tower project did not exist in the document he reviewed and signed. He described the specific discrepancies: the typeface variation, the period spacing, the format inconsistencies that he had identified immediately upon seeing it in Siwarsa Dun's laptop in his kitchen. He presented the receiving slip photograph. He presented the GW Consulting payment records from the USB drive. He walked through the timeline. December 2012. The Ridgeway bribery. December 2016. The second payment. March 2017. The report filed and buried. March 25th. The inspection that should never have happened. Warren's attorney cross-examined. He was thorough and aggressive and technically skilled. He questioned Reeves' memory across 7 years, the chain of custody of the USB drive, the reliability of a single photograph. Reeves answered each question with the precision of someone who had spent a decade building things that had to be right, in a field where right and wrong are measured to the decimal, and mistakes become visible in steel and concrete and load-bearing floor. He did not get flustered. He did not get angry. He was simply a man who knew what he knew, and 7 years in a woodshop in Appalachia had not changed the fundamental architecture of how his mind worked. When he stepped down, he did not look at Warren Grawl. He looked at Sawers, who was sitting in the front row of the gallery, straight-backed, hands folded in her lap, watching him with an attention that didn't waver. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She looked at him the way you look at something you want to remember accurately, because the accurate version is the one that matters. At 2:17 in the afternoon, Warren Grawl was taken into federal custody pending the criminal proceeding. The court declined to set bail on the grounds of flight risk and ongoing evidence destruction concern. His 3 attorneys exchanged glances and said nothing useful. The bailiff walked him out of the room in handcuffs, and for a moment the only sound was the fluorescent light above the bench. In the hallway outside room 14, Reeves stood by a window that looked out over the Chicago street below the ordinary mid-afternoon traffic, the pedestrians, who had no idea what had just happened 20 feet away. Sao Se came to stand beside him. They were close enough that he could hear her breath settle after a long exhale. He said, "She wrote those 3 names because she knew she might not be there to finish it herself." His voice was quiet. He was working to keep it that way. She filed the report, and she got on the elevator, and she went to do the inspection, because that was her job. And she knew something was wrong, and she went anyway. Sawers stood with him. She didn't tell him that Iris was brave. She didn't reach for any of the words that people reach for because silence is too difficult. She stayed there beside him, shoulder near his shoulder, both of them looking out at the ordinary street, until the weight of the room behind them became something he could carry out the door. 8 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in the middle of December, a grand jury in the Northern District of Illinois returned a formal indictment against Warren Grawl on 3 counts: federal contract fraud, organized commercial bribery, and criminally negligent homicide. The prosecution's sentencing recommendation was not less than 12 years. His attorneys requested a continuance. It was denied. Kessler Materials suspended all operations pending a federal investigation into its sales practices and vendor relationships going back 15 years. The company's managing director retained counsel and declined to comment. Leonard Hayes resigned from the Dunn Structural Board without explanation 3 weeks after the hearing. No one spent much time wondering why. Harold Dunn signed the final version of the company restructuring agreement from his hospital bed on a Wednesday morning, with Sauers sitting across from him in a chair she had pulled close to the bed. He had one condition for his signature. The company would establish the Iris Callum Construction Safety Fund, endowed from the settlement funds that the court had awarded in the overturned 2017 agreement. He said he wanted the Dunn name attached to something that Iris Callum would have recognized as worth doing. His personal lawyer notarized the document. Harold shook his daughter's hand, which was not a thing he did often, and then told her she should go get some sleep. He died 19 days later, at home, on a gray December morning, in the room where he had slept for 30 years. Sauers was there. The 2017 settlement was formally voided by the court, every clause, including the liability admission and the waiver of legal rights, that Reeve had signed on a day when his daughter had a fever and he couldn't find the bottom of his own grief. Elaine Marsh confirmed that his structural engineer's license could be reinstated at any time through a standard renewal process. He thanked her and said he'd think about it. She said, "Take your time." He had already taken the first consulting engagement, the old courthouse in downtown Beachland, a stone building from 1887 with a settling roof and a set of load-bearing walls that nobody had looked at properly since the Eisenhower administration. The work was slow and detailed, and exactly the kind of problem he had always found satisfying in the way that other people find certain music satisfying. He did the calculations in the evenings at the work table in his shop, under the single hanging light, with the smell of sawdust and the mountain dark outside the single window. Maisie did not know the details of what had happened in Chicago. She knew that something had shifted, that her father slept through the night now, that there was a new quality in the house that resembled the absence of a sound she hadn't realized she'd been hearing. She knew that a woman named Sauers called on Wednesday evenings, and that the calls lasted a while. She had already begun formulating the questions she wanted to ask about this, and she was 7 years old and therefore completely unsubtle in her approach, and Reeve was aware that this particular negotiation was coming. One evening in December, with the cold settled in hard and the ridgeline invisible behind low cloud, Reeve was in the shop finishing the load calculations for the courthouse east wall when he heard the front door. 3 knocks. Solid, evenly spaced. He switched off the work light. He walked around through the side yard to the front of the house. Sauers was standing under the porch light. She wasn't wearing a blazer. She wasn't carrying a bag of files. She had a small overnight bag over one shoulder and a bottle of wine held slightly awkwardly in her other hand, the way a person holds something they bought with intention but aren't entirely sure they're presenting correctly. She looked at him in the porch light. "I knocked at a reasonable hour this time." He looked at his watch. 9:45. Progress. He stood there for a moment, not frozen, not braced. The way you stand when you've put something very heavy down and your hands are learning what it feels like to be empty. The porch light made a warm circle on the wooden step he had planed smooth himself the previous summer. He stepped aside. He opened the door wide. The light from the kitchen spilled out into the cold night, and she walked through it.